That's good evening, folks. Thanks for coming out. It's our first live and we will, because we're all no well. We're all, Laura, Sarah, myself, Craig as well. We're all unwell. It started off with Tayami, the wee, and she's the instigator. She started it and she just seemed to have passed it round. We were all kind of slammed at the same time. So tonight, as you know, I'm not much of a talker anyway. You know, I don't like talking. I'm joined by Tracy. Tracy's here as well. Sorry, Tracy. I forgot to say, see what I mean? See when you're not well. But as you know, I'm not much for talking. We don't really know much for talking. So Tracy's going to be doing a lot of talking tonight. But tonight, we are carrying on with our Tudors, the people behind the scenes of us. We've talked about Henry, all his wives, Thomas Muller, Cardinal Wolsey. So tonight we are going to be concentrating on another two gentlemen who played quite a prominent part in Henry's court back in the day, Thomas Cromwell and Charles Brandon. Where did I get Michael for?
No idea.
As you can tell, I've not spotted. Charles, I should know the name, shouldn't I?
I know. I think this is going to be the 6th chat show that we've done, those, Scott, about the Tudors, because we did the first one back in January, actually. If people want to watch them in order, we did the first one in January, which was on Henry himself, Henry VIII. Then we did the next one on Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Then we did Jane Seymour and Anne of Cleves. And then we did Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr. So we did all of the wives. And then the last talk, we did Cardinal Wolsey and Thomas More, didn't we? So tonight we are doing Thomas Cromwell and Charles Brandon. So 2 really important key people for Henry VIII. I haven't got my specs on, so that is absolutely tiny print.
That's Laura saying hello. Hi, boss. Hello, lovely Tracy. Just want to say a quick hello. Not feeling so great, so have a great show. Thank you, dear.
Oh, thank you, Laura. I hope you feel better soon. Sorry you're all so poorly. It's a bit rubbish, isn't it?
Actually, we all seem to be slammed at the same time. I've got a mark on my t-shirt. I can see it on the screen and it's annoying me. Who was Michael Brandon?
Michael Brandon? Oh, hang on. Was he the chap that was in Little House on the Prairie?
It was. He was in Little House on the Prairie. He was Charles Ingalls.
That's the one. Yeah.
Well, don't let me talk about him, folks. No disrespect to the guy, but
even though he's lovely, he's in spirit now, isn't he? But even though he was a lovely chap as well. No, we're talking about Charles Brandon, aren't we? But we'll talk about Thomas Cromwell first, though, because previously we talked about Cardinal Wolsey and then we talked about Thomas More, but Thomas Cromwell was kind of around the same time as those. So we'll talk about Thomas Cromwell first. We might as well get started, mightn't we, Scott?
May as well, since we're here, carry on.
So I'll tell you a little bit about Thomas Cromwell. So in 1485, he was born in Putney. And he came from very humble beginnings. So his father was a blacksmith. So it's interesting, isn't it, how a lot of people around Henry VIII came from very humble beginnings to start with, and ended up in court, you know, with royalty, basically, didn't they? So as a young man, he left England and he spent time in France and in Italy, and he was a soldier. So from a very, very young age.
There's Sarah saying hi.
Hi, Sarah. He then became a merchant and a clerk. So he was quite a bright spark, you know, right from the beginning, really, and gained a lot of confidence and a lot of experience by becoming a soldier and travelling. He was fluent in several languages and acquired extensive knowledge of law, trade and finances. And he was quite driven because he kind of did all of this himself whilst he was sort of travelling. And then in 1510, he returned to England and he built a successful legal trade and commerce career. So he was always doing very well. He was already doing very well and making a sort of name for himself. And then in 1515, he married, but sadly his wife died quite soon after from the sweating sickness, which is what was quite common back then, wasn't it? A lot of people died quite.
It was. The sweating sickness was quite right then, and I think that's what.
I hope that's not what you've got.
I totally missed that.
I hope that's not what you've all got. We don't want you to have the sweating sickness down there.
I don't think that's a thing anymore, is it? Aye, the sweating sickness, that's what Lady Black Henry's illegitimate son, he passed away from mine.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't know Cromwell was born in Putney.
Yeah, he was born in Putney, and his father was a blacksmith.
Oh, so, my mate, he stays in Putney. I've been to Putney a few times, quite posh.
Ah, there you go.
And it's famous for the thingy.
Rowing.
The boats. That's where they set off in the races and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Putney Bridge.
But I've been to Putney quite a few times over the bridge and out at the train station, what have you. So it's quite posh, very expensive.
Yeah, it probably wasn't back then, was it?
Not then, but
no. It is now.
No, it is now. But that's just a bit of useless information.
Carry on. So he lost his poor wife through the sweating sickness. He had one legitimate son, and actually his son eventually rose to prominence as well, marrying the sister of Jane Seymour, who was called Elizabeth. So his son actually did very well for himself as well. So they were quite a driven family, I think, despite, as I say, coming from humble beginnings. However, the son is sadly said to have died during the plague outbreak. So he lost his wife and he lost his son, over a little period of time. But it was quite tough back then, wasn't it? You were lucky if you had a strong constitution, you kind of survived, didn't you? So it was a really, really difficult time. But in 1519, so we're moving on a little bit now, Cromwell then entered the service of Cardinal Wolsey. So we dealt with Cardinal Wolsey in our previous chat. So if you want to refer back to that, then you can learn all about Cardinal Wolsey. He was a bit of a character, to say the least, wasn't he? So Cromwell, so Cromwell entered his service. So he was under the sort of guardianship, really, of Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. And he was Henry VIII's trusted advisor in court at the time. So Thomas Cromwell, he was described as being a very stocky man, quite heavy set. He had quite a severe face and very cropped hair, very dark eyes and quite a dour expression. So he was quite a foreboding character, really. And he dressed in black a lot of the time because a man of his standing and his legal prowess, that's how they used to dress. They would dress in black. So he was really quite an intimidating character, quite stern and quite serious. And in 1529, Wolsey fell from favour, as we know, again, taken care of in our previous talk. And Cromwell soon entered the king's inner circle, much to the disapproval of a lot of the other courtiers that were there. And Cromwell was really instrumental in engineering the break from the Roman Catholic Church. So he drafted the Act of Supremacy, marking the king the supreme head of the Church of England, when the Great Reformation happened. And he promoted the spread of Protestant ideas, and he also supported the Bible being translated into English. So he had quite a few key tasks under his belt, basically. And then in 1536 to 1541 came the dissolution of the monasteries, where, a lot of them were destroyed. And Cromwell was really instrumental in doing this, sending lots of people out, destroying the monasteries, hundreds of them, in fact. I mean, it was quite awful when you think about what happened to all of these poor fathers, priests, monks, whatever it was. And he was seizing the wealth and, basically putting the money into the crown. So taking any of the finances, any of the gold, anything that was valuable. And a lot of these poor monks suffered terribly, and a lot of them obviously were executed. So his moves weakened the church and strengthened the Tudor regime. So he carried out harsh measures, and he was using spies and informants to let him know about, certain people, the way certain people were behaving, certain people in monasteries. Anybody that went into hiding. Cromwell seemed to have spies in every camp. So he was quite a powerful man, but not necessarily in a good way. He was very shrewd. He was very intelligent. He was quite ruthless. He was very manipulative when it came to law and politics. So he kind of really wangled things in his own favour, really, and to also please Henry VIII. He was instrumental in the downfall of Anne Boleyn. We've talked about Anne Boleyn before, haven't we? And they absolutely despised one another, didn't they, Scott?
They did. This is one of the points I was going to bring up. We just came back to the dissolution of the monasteries. It was quite a bad time, as you say. They just basically went in and robbed them, murdered them, you know, and that was the end of it. You know, there was no quarter given, there was no mercy, no nothing.
No.
You had no chance. But Cromwell was very instrumental.
Yeah, he really was. He really was. And then so obviously we know what happened to Anne Boleyn. She did lose her head, and Thomas Cromwell was very instrumental in making sure that happened, because he felt quite threatened by Anne, because obviously Henry was starting to listen to some of Anne's political points of views because she was very intelligent. But I think Thomas Cromwell wanted to run the show. He wanted to be the top man. And obviously Cardinal Wolsey had gone, he had died, he was off the scene, so he could take the head, you know, the head position, really. And then in 1540, Cromwell instigated the marriage of Henry VIII to Anne of Cleves. So this was a quest to strengthen the alliances with other Protestant states, and particularly Germany. And as we know, that really didn't go well. And again, we've covered that, so we don't want to go over the same ground again. But he was quite key and quite instrumental in real specific things happening during Henry VIII's time, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the Duke. Sorry, Scott, were you going to say something?
I know, just the Anne of Cleves. I know we covered that in a previous show, but it didn't go. As you say, he was quite instrumental in putting the deal together, basically. And I think when, you know, obviously we know that when Henry was first introduced there, he wasn't best impressed by her, you know, appearance-wise and what have you. And I think it shows, I mean, there's two things. Just, I want to get back to Anne Boleyn as well, but with the Anne of Cleves thing, you know, Cromwell's trying to, at the end of the day, everybody was trying to please the king. You know, they wanted as high up in that ladder as they could get. So Cromwell probably thought, you know, right, well, I've dealt with the monasteries. That turned out quite good for me. So, you know, we need to get the king married again. I'm going to put all this together, and then it falls flat in its face. So that kind of leaves Cromwell open. But I mean, the Anne Boleyn, it shows, as we talked about in other shows, you know, you'd Cromwell, you'd Wolsey, two very powerful men. Yeah. You know, and the two of them went out their way to make sure Anne Boleyn was destroyed, basically. This is how much, I think people realise just how much a threat Anne Boleyn was. You know,
to the other support.
You know, if these two men felt threatened by her, by a woman, you know, that sounds sexist. It's no sexist, but you know, back then it was women were here, men were up there, and for two men of their ranking to feel threatened. All right, she was the Queen of England, she was married to the king, but she was still a woman, and they felt really threatened, but they went out their way to put together her downfall. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really does. So, he put Anne of Cleves in Henry VIII's path. As we know, that was annulled after 6 months because they did end up being best of friends way further on down the line. But at the time, they weren't attracted to one another. And this was a bit of a nail in Cromwell's coffin because Henry VIII felt like he'd been made a bit of a fool of, being presented with this potential queen who he thought was going to be quite a beauty, who wasn't to his liking. We're not saying that she wasn't unattractive, but I don't think she was to his liking. So that all went terribly wrong. So Cromwell was kind of, you know, really scurrying to stay at the top a little bit, wasn't he? And he'd already made a lot of other enemies in court because everybody wanted to be Henry VIII's right-hand man. Cromwell had kind of weaned his way in, wormed his way in, and Henry VIII really did take notice of him. So the others in court were really threatened by him, the other members of the Privy Council. So they were always plotting and scheming, weren't they, to sort of work their way to the top. And the Duke of Norfolk, who was very powerful and among many in court, were his enemies. And they were gathering more and more evidence against him to bring to the king. So all of these things were going against him, with what happened with the monasteries, what happened with Anne, because I think Henry VIII did regret losing Anne, as we know, in Berlin. He regretted doing what he did, and everything that went against the Catholic Church had set a lot of enemies against the king and the crown. So Cromwell was instrumental in setting off a chain reaction of a lot of bad events that happened around Henry VIII. So the Duke of Norfolk and many of the Privy Council were really quite keen to, get shot of him. And they were sort of, reporting back. They had their own spies in court, didn't they? And they're reporting back to Henry VIII about, what he'd said, what he'd done. Some of it was true, some of it probably wasn't. And then, as the other ones have gone, sadly, he was then, after quite some time, he was then arrested for treason and heresy, and he was imprisoned in the Tower. And then, we are going forward quite a bit now, but in 1540, on the 28th of July, at aged 54, he was then executed by beheading at the Tower. And he was buried in the chapel of St. Peter and left in an unmarked grave. And there's very little we know after Cromwell, because there are no recorded hauntings at all. If you look up any hauntings of Thomas Cromwell, there are none, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because going by our other ones that we've dealt with, our other people we've dealt with, you would think he would have a little bit of an attitude and he'd want to come back and haunt somebody or haunt somewhere. I don't know whether you know any differently or not, Scott, but I certainly
no. I've no. As you say, he was executed in Tower Hill. He was. Yeah. Some people think that he was executed in the Tower of London, which he wasn't. Also Tower Hill. You've got the site just up for the Tower of London. You've got the site where the scaffold was, and you've got the list of names. Of everybody who was executed there. Well, the majority of people who were executed there, and he's listed there. Yeah. On there, so he wasn't actually executed in the Tower. Contrary to what some folk have been told, that he was executed in Tower Hill. But haunting wise, no. I mean, Anna Cleves. There's nothing about her. Mm-hmm. Thomas Cromwell.
Oh, I know.
Nothing to our knowledge. Even I mean, you get the sort of famous spirits that are said to haunt the Tower. Mm-hmm. But you see, the whole haunting these places, I know I'm kind of 50-50 on it. As during Anne Boleyn, so take Anne Boleyn, for example, she's said to haunt about 7 or 8 different places.
Yeah.
Tower of London, Hever Castle, Hampton Court, Salisbury Hall. That's just 4 of them, basically. Mm. But, Henry VIII, he seems to be all over the place as well. But you'd never ever hear Cromwell.
No.
That's not to say that he isn't. He doesn't hang about somewhere. Is it possible that, how could you put it? Say Anne Boleyn, right? Take Salisbury Hall, for instance. You said to haunt there. Mm-hmm. The Salisbury Hall has, there is evidence of haunting, and there is a woman haunts there. People have said, "Oh, it's Anne Boleyn," because she's got ties here. So who's to say that Cromwell doesn't haunt somewhere? He's just not been identified yet.
Yeah, and interestingly, I don't know if anybody watching will have watched Wolf Hall, but Wolf Hall, the series that was on TV, is based on a real place and real people, including Cromwell. And he was played by Mark Rylance in that documentary or that drama. And I thought Mark Rylance was brilliant to play him. And I think if he were to come back, I feel like it's somewhere like Wolf Hall where he would haunt, because that was a place that he spent a lot of time and where he was quite powerful. He was learning to assert his power when he was there. And the other actor who played him was a chap called James Frayne. Don't know if you remember him in the Tudors. So
he was brilliant as him in the Tudors.
He was. Two very different actors playing the part of Thomas Cromwell. But I feel that they portrayed him very well. I would say James Frayne was probably a slightly more likeable version of Thomas Cromwell, the way he played him. But in Wolf Hall, going back to Mark Rylance playing him, it showed how when he was arrested and in the Tower, and he was being questioned by senior members of the Privy Council on behalf of Henry VIII, he was so witty and so clever at trying to divert and navigate his way out of this situation. He was so clever with words. He was so manipulative and devious. He knew how to play people. And I really, truly believe that when he was being questioned in the Tower, he thought he would get out of it. There would be some sort of get out clause for him. And I think that Mark Rylance, who played him as that character, really portrayed that very well in Wolf Hall. Wolf Hall is quite a deep drama about Thomas Cromwell in particular. It's very wordy, it's very in-depth, but you really listen to what he has to say. He was a very, very clever character, but unfortunately not clever enough to negotiate himself out of being beheaded.
I've not watched it. I've not watched that.
It's quite good. I mean, the Tudors is gripping, as we know. Most of us that are listening to this have probably watched the Tudors at some stage. That's very, very gripping. Whereas Wolf Hall is very political, and there's a lot of narrative, a lot of script to it. So it takes some listening to. But when you get into it, it's really very clever. It's really very, very much based around his character, and also Anne Boleyn, actually, and the interactions between the two. But I think he was a really interesting character. I mean, do you feel, Scott, that he was a good man? Do you feel Thomas Cromwell was a good man?
I think, this is my opinion, I think he started out, as, with all good intentions and stuff like that. But as with a lot of people who entered Henry's court and who climbed, I think it kind of went to their head, went to his head, and with him being put in charge with, rewriting the Bible, the monasteries, all the rest of it, I think he's put himself up there and thought he was untouchable.
Yeah.
Basically, and then the Anne Boleyn thing, he needed to get rid of Anne Boleyn because she was a threat to him.
Yeah.
So I think he kind of turned towards the end, not into somebody evil, but just somebody who wanted their own way, was used to getting their own way, and would, like a lot of other people in Henry's court, let's face it, would stand on their own mother to save their
to get where they want to be.
So I do, and I know he was very much hated. I mean, there is the thing. Just talk about his son. Actually, just jump back to his son, because you mentioned the Tudors. We've watched the Tudors about 4 or 5 times. We love the Tudors. Quite a few bits are not entirely accurate. Well, it's the same with everything, really, isn't it? But you said he outlived his son. Yeah. Cromwell. Because in the Tudors, when Cromwell's going to the scaffold, it shows you him talking to who's meant to be his son.
I think he had more than one son. He had one legitimate son. So it was the legitimate son that died of the plague. So he could have had other sons, you see. So as we know, back in that day, back in that era, it was very common for men to have a mistress. It wasn't frowned upon. That's just what happened. And that was just what was accepted. So he probably had fathered several children, but his legitimate son was the one that died of the plague. But these dramas are not going to be absolutely accurate, are they? Because, they do make them a little bit jazzed up for the TV or for films, don't they?
They do, but I mean, Cromwell, he was very obvious, was very intelligent, very career-driven, and that comes across in the Tudors. And then when you say, Wolf Hall, when his character expected to get away with it, maybe Cromwell did, again, in the Tudors, it shows you Cromwell locked up in the Tower He's been found guilty. You know, he knows what's going to happen to him. And it shows you him, two things. It shows you him going to the scaffold to sort of snivelling wreck. All right, he's not going to be happy. Do you know what I mean? But with the other men who went to the scaffold, they went with sort of a wee bit of dignity and pride. But Cromwell's supposed to have broke down on the scaffold, you know.
Yeah.
Then there's the other point, whether it's actually true or not, about the actual execution itself. It shows you in the Tudors.
Quite bodged, wasn't it?
I think it was Brandon and somebody else got a hold of the headsman the night before and got him absolutely drunk. And so when it came to executing Cromwell, the headsman couldn't do his job.
No, it was pretty gruesome, wasn't it? In the Tudors, portrayed in the Tudors. So I think when you were going to be beheaded in the Tudor times, you wanted to have a really good axeman, didn't you? If that's the right word, executioner, because when you see some of the films and some of the dramas, and you show what did go wrong and what could go wrong, it's pretty horrific, isn't it? And yeah, I think it took several blows to behead him, didn't it? In fact, I think in the Tudors they portrayed somebody actually grabbing the axe from the executioner and, you know, finishing the job.
He's one of the guards. He grabs the axe and delivers the final blow. But I mean, it's Lady Salisbury. Look at her execution.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah. I mean, it's awful.
And she was in her 70s, which shows you just how ruthless. I don't want to talk about Henry, but shows you just how ruthless the whole era was, Henry included. I mean, she was in her 70s, you know, and because Henry couldn't get to Reginald Pole, he went for her family. And she was, you know, he executed a 70-year-old woman who had been the guardian, which I did a name for them back then, but looked after his kids.
Yeah.
You know, because we see previously that she's looking after the children when they're younger.
Yeah.
And then she ends up in the scaffold herself. And that was quite a horrific execution for what has been said, you know. But Cromwell, his enemies, they wanted him to suffer as much as possible.
I know.
You know, it wasn't enough for him just to be beheaded. They wanted the real deal.
They really despised him, didn't they? They really, really did. Do you think after he was beheaded, do you think Henry VIII felt remorse that he had beheaded somebody who'd been quite close to him, you know, a confidant, and also a really good friend, despite everything that happened?
I think he did it with quite a few of them. Anne Boleyn, you know, Anne Boleyn, Cromwell, More. These were people who had stood by Henry.
Yeah.
You know, for years. Anne Boleyn maybe not so much, but More, Cromwell, people like that had stood by Henry since he was young.
Yeah.
You know, guided him, taught him. Became really, really close with him. And then I think he's executed them through pressure from the court, for his court.
Yeah.
You know, so he didn't lose face.
Yeah.
You know, because you've got the king here, he's the boss, he's in charge, but then you've maybe got half a dozen of his advisors saying, look, he's did this, he's did that, he's did this. So what does Henry do? Does Henry, you know, well, I'm going to sort him out, kind of thing, let's execute him. Try to keep his tough guy side and put the friendships bit to the side, I think. And inside, he regretted it very much. But then
I think he must have done. I think it must have really affected him when you think of the wives that he executed, and then Thomas More, and then Cardinal Wolsey dying because he shunned him away, and then the next close confidant was Thomas Cromwell, who we're talking about. That must have really mentally affected Henry. When he looked back on who he'd killed, really at his own hands, because it was his choice, wasn't it, to do the Tower to be executed. So I think that must have a huge impact.
And it must have left Henry in the state of mind, you know, who can I trust?
Yeah, I know.
Because Henry was he wasn't a daft man, he was the stupid. You know, he was an intelligent man.
Yeah,
And he would have known that, you know, all these people all around him, they're basically wanting to climb the ladder and save their own hide, basically.
yeah.
And he's thinking, well, who can I really trust out of all these people?
I
He'd
know.
nobody. I think the only person he could trust, and this is portrayed in the Tudors, was the fool.
Yeah, because he confided in him, didn't he? When he went into a bit of a deep, dark depression after James Seymour had died, he was the one he confided in, because he was quite, I guess he just had a role to play. He was quite distanced from Henry. So you're absolutely right. He could confide in him a bit like a therapist, I guess, couldn't he?
Because the fool, he'd nothing to gain. He wasn't interested in power or anything like that. So, you know, he didn't dare lie to the king anyway, but he'd no reason to sit there and say to the king, look, it's going to be okay, you'll be fine, give me a cuddle, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
I think he just told Henry the way it was.
Yeah.
And I think he got away with it because he was totally blunt with Henry. And this is what Henry wanted. He wanted people to sit and say, look, Your Majesty, you know, you're talking crap.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, he might have been a king, but, you know, he was human at the end of the day. He did, all right, to what the second half of his reign, it wasn't so compassionate, you know. But I think that's all he wanted at the end of the day, was that somebody sit down and slap him in the face, basically, verbally.
Yeah.
And this is what this guy did, the fool.
Yeah.
You know, so you're an idiot, you've been an idiot, grow up, you know. And he could get away with it. Anybody else dare say that to Henry, they're doing right to the scaffold.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. I think it's because he was a little bit detached from him, wasn't he? He wasn't one of his advisors. He could, like you say, could be absolutely honest. And this is a little bit like Charles Brandon, who we're going to go on to next. He was very, you know, had a very different connection to Henry VIII. And he was a very handsome man, a very gorgeous man. And before we talk about him, I must say, John Azuna said hello to everybody. I said we were going to be talking tonight, and he said, oh, please say hello to everybody. So there you go. I thought I'd just let you know. I'm going to put the specs on.
There you go, folks. But John says hello for you. See, I'm eating I must apologise. I'm eating a what's he call them?
Tunes?
Soothers.
Oh, soothers. Okay.
Tracy's got a thing for John Azuna. She was on a show with me, and she just fell hopeless in love. What can I say? You know,
he's just a friend. But he said hello to everybody. I just thought I'd tell you that. So yeah.
She asked him, "Are you single? Are you single, John?" What does that? You know, come on. Every time I talk to you, are you here for John? What's John doing today? What time did John get up?
Oh, it's all right. I just look at Facebook and I can see what he's up to.
Stalker comes to mind.
Stalker, yeah, poor old John.
But if you do watch this, John, don't worry. I have wandered off you. There's only so much stalking you can do for this side of the pond.
he is winding you up, John. He is, I tell you.
Not me. Not my good friend, John.
Your good mate. So we will talk about another lovely guy, Charles Brandon. Now, for anybody, I'll just tell you so you can picture him. Anybody that watched the Tudors, Charles Brandon was Henry VIII's best friend, and he was played by Henry Cavill, the one who plays Superman. And he's, you know, he's a bit of a dish, let's face it.
She calm down.
If you can picture
John Azuna, Henry Cavill, Cavill, Superman.
Yeah, but John's got the moves, hasn't he? He's got
John, you get competition.
So Charles Brandon, okay, so he was so important in Henry VIII's life. Okay, so we'll start from the beginning. So in 1484, he was born. I've got my glasses on for him, serious stuff. His father was Sir William Brandon, and he was a standard bearer for Henry Tudor, so Henry VIII's father. And at the Battle of Bosworth, he was killed, so leaving Charles as a young child. So after the after the death of his father, Charles Brandon, the young Charles, was raised in court. He was sent to Henry VIII's, well, it wasn't Henry VIII's court then, it was his father, Henry Tudor's court. And he became a squire and a companion for the then very young Prince Henry. And Charles Brandon was actually 6 or 7 years older than Henry. So Henry really did look up to him because obviously he was a lot sort of older and wiser than him. And in 1509, when Henry became king, Brandon benefited greatly from their friendship because he was granted titles and lands and all sorts of offices. He was a skilled jouster, so him and Henry used to get up to all sorts when they were younger, and you can imagine them sort of growing up together, even though there was that slight age difference. And Brandon became a military commander, and he dressed in the finest clothing. You know, he was a really handsome guy. He was best friends with Henry VIII. Yet all the ladies really, really fell for him. All the men looked up to him. And in 1513, he fought in the Battle of Spurs in France. And then a year later, in 1514, he became the Duke of Suffolk. He was given that title, which is one of the highest ranking noble titles bestowed by Henry VIII. He was very charming. He was very intelligent. He was handsome and athletic. And he was said to have very many mistresses before he even got married, and then also during and after his marriages. So in 1515, Charles Brandon secretly married the king's sister, Mary Tudor. She was only 18 at the time, and she was the widow of King Louis of France. So Charles and Mary married in secret without the king's permission. And when Henry found out, he was absolutely furious. He banned them from court. He fined him great amounts of money. He had to pay really, really sort of hefty fines. And of course, because they were such good friends, he did eventually forgive his friend, and he did allow him back to court, and he did allow his sister back to court. Charles's marriage to Mary, to Henry VIII's sister, was very happy, and they produced many children. Mary sadly died at the age of 37 from cancer or tuberculosis. They're not sure really which it was back then, but Charles mourned her greatly because despite having taken many mistresses, even when he was married to her, he did truly adore her, and he really did truly love her. I think they had quite a temperamental relationship, but there was that, undying love that was there for her. So he really did mourn her. Not long after, actually, and this was really frowned upon, but not long after, he married a 14-year-old girl who was a rich heiress. So this didn't meet with everybody's approval at the time. Of course, Henry VIII didn't seem to mind because younger women were in court, and that seemed to be quite the normal thing to do. But compared to the age of his previous wife, she was obviously a lot younger, so a lot of people disapproved. During Henry's reign, Charles served as Lord President of the Council, so again, a really high position. He participated in key military campaigns, including in 1523, the invasion of France. So he was a well-respected military man, he really was. He was very good at leadership, very good at leading the armies that went with him. And in 1536, he was sent to suppress the uprising in Lincolnshire and the north against the rebels protesting at the dissolution of the monasteries. So this really affected him because he was having to punish and torture and give orders to kill thousands of people. At the he was kind of under the king's rule. He had to do what he was told. He was sent on these missions. And I think this really, really affected him because young children were hanged, the wives were hanged, and it just wherever they went, where there was a rebellion, the people were just murdered at his hands, really, when you think about it, because he was leading this quite brutal army on behalf of Henry VIII. His loyalty remained during the rise and fall of Anne Boleyn. He was very clever at being very close to Henry VIII, but he didn't get involved in any of the politics. He was very much sent out to lead the armies and to go to battle. So he wasn't ingratiated into all of the Privy Council, you know, sort of rumours and spies and backstabbing. He kind of stayed nicely away from that, and the people in the Privy Council really respected him. They really sort of looked up to him for what he had done. So yeah, despite being so close to the king, he managed to avoid the worst court intrigues, really. And he didn't get involved so much with the likes of Wolsey and Cromwell, which is probably just as well, because knowing what happened to them, you never knew what might have happened to him. But he was loyal to Henry. He was a great diplomat. He was very chivalrous and courageous. And he was every woman's dream, really. He was just, you know, like I said, men looked up to him. Women absolutely adored him. And then very sadly, after living quite a long and full life, and also staying on the right side of Henry, so he never had any particular hardships there, aside from obviously all the battles and things that he'd seen, which really did mentally scar him. But on the 22nd of August in 1545, at age 61, which was a brilliant age, he died basically due to old age, general decline in his health. And he was given a state funeral fit for a royal. And he's buried at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. He outlived many of the original courtiers, but he did die before Henry VIII. So Henry mourned the loss of Charles greatly, as he had always been such a true and close friend. The only indiscretion was marrying his sister in secret. Brandon's sons died young also, so it's really quite sad. His daughter went on to produce Lady Jane Grey. So this is Brandon's granddaughter was Lady Jane Grey. And as we know, she reigned for 9 days until her execution in 1553 at age 16. So although Brandon himself had a very long, you know, fortuitous life, really, his family didn't sort of live on, and it was very sad what happened. So I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Scott, but I think he's one of my particular favourites, because he kind of, as I say, he managed to stay out of all of the antics that were happening in court. He didn't have it totally easy, because he had to go off to battle, he had to lead an army and, you know, carry out some pretty brutal and gruesome punishments for the uprising against the king. But I don't know how you feel about it.
To it. There was I mean, with Henry's reign, you had the political side to it, you know.
Yeah.
But then you had the military side. We all know that Henry was a great military man, you know, and he wanted as much territories, land, whatever you want to call it, as possible. Even though the politics of it all was important to him, the military side was equally important. And we see this when we look back at how much money he actually spent, especially with the, you know, his ships and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the Mary Rose on his ships, because Henry wanted to be the supreme power, not just politically, but military-wise as well. Yeah. And I think that's where Brandon came in handy. You see, Brandon, he wasn't a stupid man. I don't think he was interested in the political side of it.
No.
You know, he chose, to be the military side of it. And this served him really well, because you say he wasn't getting involved with Cromwell, Wolsey, anybody, because he didn't need to.
No, exactly. And they respected him for what he did, you know, for leading an army into battle. They totally respected him. So he didn't get involved in the antics of court at all. So he was kind of at a safe distance, which, you know, kept him safe throughout his life, really, because Henry always respected him, didn't he, and honoured him.
And I think having that extra wee tie to Henry, because he'd known him since they were kids, basically.
Yeah, that's it. You know, they were, childhood friends onwards.
Because we all know, you know, when Henry was a child, it was after he was a favourite. You know, he was with the king all the time. Henry was still looked after, but he was kind of pushed to the side. You know, so he didn't really have anybody except this guy Charles Brandon, who, as you said yourself, he looked up to. You know, Charles mentored him and all the rest of it. And I think through Henry's life, there was very, very few people that he could actually truly trust.
Yeah.
You know, we've already spoken about the Fool. But I think Charles was one of these men as well. I don't think Charles played on it. I don't think he sort of used it to his advantage. Maybe when it came to marrying Henry's sister, that was a big taboo. But in general, I think Charles was just a genuine friend to Henry.
Yeah.
You know, he'd nothing to gain, he'd nothing to lose. He wasn't interested in power. He just wanted to go out and do his job as a military man and, you know, live his life basically. And to hell with all the you know, the hangers on and the spongers and all the rest of it. Marrying his sister was a bit brave, you know.
Or stupid, whichever.
Well, aye, stupid as well, but you know, I think maybe he used his reposition then because he maybe thought, well, you know, it's Henry, it's his sister. I'm married. Henry's going to be fine with it. But it turned out it was the opposite. I think that's what saved his Charles's neck as well, was the friendship for an early childhood. And he knew that he didn't want, Henry wouldn't want to get rid of somebody else that he thought he could trust. You know.
He was a great companion to Henry when he was very young, and don't forget he was 6 years older than Henry, so he must have had quite an influence on him because he was, you know, very high up himself. Charles Brandon came from a very, you know, wealthy and noble family, so he would have felt quite at home being at court and a really good, you know, mentor for Henry VIII in his early years. But it's interesting how I feel that Henry really relied on him and really valued his friendship, because it's said that when Charles Brandon was, you know, nearing the end of his life, he became very poorly and was in bed. And Henry VIII got word of this, and he absolutely demanded that Charles came to see him. Henry wouldn't go to see Charles. Charles had to go to court and see him. And I think it was Henry asserting his authority and being in denial that he wasn't going to lose his best friend. He wasn't going to hear of him laying in bed feeling sorry for himself, even though the poor chap was dying. So I think even on death's door, Charles Brandon got up, got out of bed, got dressed and went to court to please his friend, to, you know, to be with him. And very soon after that meeting, he did go back home and he died peacefully with his family around him. But I think that was Henry kind of being in denial, saying, I'm not allowing my friend to die. My best friend cannot leave me. Because if you think about it, when Charles Brandon died, Henry must have felt quite destitute with all of the people that had been close to him that had been executed at his hands, to then lose his best friend who had always been there. That must have been so, so difficult for Henry. I mean, wasn't that long after, I think it was a year later that Henry died himself, but that must have been a huge blow to him to lose his best friend and mentor, basically.
I think I totally agree. It would have been, you know, because you say he'd executed so many people, you know, and some very, very close to him. And this, I think Charles was the last one, you know, remaining.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Again, the word trust comes up. That he knew he could truly trust. And, you know, they'd known each other since childhood, basically. And
he was 61. He was 61 when he died, so that's such a good age.
I mean, you think about it. I mean, you know, the mortality rate, the age. I mean, that's in the 1500s. I know in the 1600s, the average was about 30, 35.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, people did live longer. Like prime examples, Elizabeth Dendyke for the Pendle witch trials. This was one of the reasons that she was accused of being a witch, because she was 85. So people thought that she'd made a pact with the devil, basically, to live to 85. You know, so if it was like 30, 35 in the early 1600s, I would imagine it would have been roughly about the same, you know, mid 1500s.
Yeah.
You know. Because let's face it, sanitation, all that, there was non-existent, you know. And you'd a lot of TB, you'd the plague, you'd the sweating sickness, you'd that many diseases going about there, and there was no cure for them. Well, they thought there was cures for them, you know, but
they used to bleed people,
leeches and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Henry even made up different potions, you know.
Oh, he got absolutely obsessed, didn't he? When the plague was, well, as you would, when the plague and the sweating sickness were around, he would move from palace to palace, wouldn't he? And he'd make up all these pills and potions. And he was told that to exercise would keep it away. So he'd jump out of bed in the middle of the night and start doing all these exercises, allegedly, wouldn't he? Because he was so paranoid about becoming ill. So yeah, it must be really
there's a scene like that in the Tudors where he jumps out of bed and he starts.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, it's such difficult times. You think you had to avoid the sweating sickness, you had to avoid the plague. If you survived both of those or avoided both of those, potentially you could have been beheaded, you could have been boiled, you could have been burnt at the stake. I mean, it was pretty brutal times, wasn't it? Pretty horrendous.
It wasn't quite brutal, but I would love to have lived then to have an insight. You know that if you could time travel.
Oh, yeah, that'd be fascinating, wouldn't it?
And just jump back to the during Henry's reign, you know, for a week maybe, and just keep out the road and just have a wee look, see what's going on, and then come back to
safely.
In case you're doing there for a week and you end up getting that's like your bugger, basically. You know what I mean? But no, it was a really horrendous time.
It was in so many ways.
To be alive, and you see, you do all these diseases, and then the threat of, especially at court, the threat of execution was constantly hanging over you.
Yeah. It didn't matter, did it, how high up his Privy Council members were or how noble they were. It really didn't matter. Nobody, if you got close to the king, and this is where Charles Brandon was an exception, if you got close to the king, you were at such high risk of him turning on you and having you sent to the Tower, or the other members of the Privy Council turning on you and feeding, rumours in the king's ears so that you got sent to the Tower. So I think we said before, it was quite a toxic place to be in court. One of the Privy Council members, people saw it from the outside possibly as a privileged place. But in reality, it must have been quite horrific. You had to sort of justify your reasons for being there. You had to be on your guard. You had to kind of try and be friends with everybody because you didn't want people to turn on you. But everybody did at the end of the day. They turned on each other, didn't they? And
it was a daily thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't a monthly thing. It was a daily thing. People would get up in the morning not knowing if they were going to be in the Tower by night.
I know. It's quite shocking, isn't it? It really is quite shocking. But two really interesting characters we've talked about tonight, because Thomas Cromwell, I mean, we did quite a brief summary of him, really, because he did play a big part for quite a long time in Henry's court, and he was a very clever, manipulative man, which in some ways led to his downfall. And
do you think that he deserved to be executed, or do you think he was just set up?
He'd put a few nails in his own coffin by, the reasons that we said about Anne of Cleves, helping with the downfall of Anne Boleyn, then introducing Anne of Cleves. So many things happened that went against him. But I truly believe in my heart of hearts that he had good intentions and he just wanted to do what he felt was right for the king. I feel that he was there to support and help the king. And it was just a shame that, he was a bit devious, as we know from what we've said. He was a bit of a wordsmith. He was very clever, very intellectual. So he was a threat to all of the other senior members of Privy Council. So you can see why they would have put the knives in the back and been feeding all sorts of information to Henry, to make their own way up in court. But I feel very sad, really, that any of them were executed, because I don't particularly feel that any of them were really bad. They just made mistakes and they were just driven to support Henry and to work their way up in the court. Even Cardinal Wolsey, yes, he was no true religious person if you look back on our previous talk, when we talk about him, but there was something very charismatic about him. And I feel like, we don't know whether he was murdered, whether he took his own life, or whether he did die. I think all of those losses of lives are all sad. And the way that they went, way before their time, a lot of them, was so tragic. Not forgetting his wives that we've talked about as well, the ones that, you know, going back to Catherine of Aragon, she was cast aside, wasn't she? And she basically died of a broken heart. A couple of others were beheaded. I mean, nobody was safe when you were around Henry VIII. The only one I truly feel was safe was Charles Brandon, this wonderful man who had been friends with him for such a long time. So it was such a difficult time to live, wasn't it? And it really does make you wonder what Henry VIII truly felt, because we've mentioned this before, when he had his jousting accident and he had his head injury. We do feel that changed his personality even more, but I still truly believe that he had feelings and he did care for these people. So he must have felt terrible remorse about what he did. You know, and then obviously losing Charles, who died naturally, of course. He must have been quite depressed before he died, Henry VIII.
I don't think he'd have been too happy.
No, it wasn't an easy life for him, was it?
No, you know, because I mean, his only son, you know, legitimate son, you know, he'd passed away when I think he was 50 or something.
Yeah.
Obviously he succeeded Henry, but you know, Anne, Mary, he's all mushed. Mary and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
It wasn't the family wanted or planned. You know, I think he wanted a basket full of sons.
Yeah, I know. He never got what he truly wanted, did he? It was all quite a tragic life for him. You know, when you think about it, wasn't it?
And then that and Topi, or losing Jane Seymour as well. I think that was...
Yeah, that broke him, didn't it?
I think she would have been... I think if she hadn't passed away, then she would have been his last wife.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But then you never know, because when you think about how he cast aside Catherine of Aragon and broke away from the Catholic Church just to be with Anne Boleyn, and then 3 years later arranged for her to be beheaded, he could turn so quickly, couldn't he? So how do you know? Maybe he might have still been with Jane Seymour. Maybe she could have done something that might have upset him, or people might have been whispering about her. You just don't know how it would have played out, really, do you? But it was quite a tragic and sad time when you look at the whole picture, including Henry. Although it looks to us from the outside that he had a very privileged life, he did, from the fact of, you know, the riches and the title and the land and all of the feasts and parties and everything they used to have. But underneath, did he ever have a happy life with everything that happened? Possibly not. Maybe happy moments, but yeah.
In general, no.
Quite a sad time, really, wasn't it? But fascinating, as we've said before in our previous talks. I think people will talk about the Tudors for years to come, because Henry VIII and his 6 wives are infamous anyway, aren't they? But it's all the people that we've kind of brought to life around him, you know, the close people that kind of get a little bit overlooked unless you watch the Tudors or you watch any dramas about Henry VIII. You don't really get to know the inside of Thomas Cromwell and Thomas More and Cardinal Wolsey, but we've kind of talked about them in, you know, quite depth really over the last 6 episodes that we've done. Because most people just talk about Henry and his wives, don't they?
Well, that's it. I mean, you're totally right, Tracy, because, you know, if you turn to somebody and say, who was Anne Boleyn, so one of Henry VIII's wives, who was George Boleyn? Who? You know?
Yeah.
Maybe you might get a handful of people say, that was Anne Boleyn's brother. You know, if you say, who was Thomas Cromwell? What did he do?
Yeah.
Don't have a clue. You know, and it's these people that they deserve to be remembered as well, because, you know, at the end of the day, there were still people, regardless of what they did in Henry's name or Henry's service, whatever you want to call it, there were still people there was still somebody's son, daughter, whatever, and they still had lives, and maybe they deserve to be executed, maybe they never, but the fact is they should still be talked about, you know. There's a lot of groups on Facebook that cover the Tudors, people on TikTok as well, who still cover the Tudors to this day. And I watched quite a few of them. And they all talk about Henry and 6 wives, you know, but very little will mention, you know, George Boleyn or Anne Boleyn's father, or, you know.
Exactly.
Well, another question is, which I like covering another show, is there's, I think the debate still goes on to this day. Was Henry VII a true king?
That's another story then, isn't it? Going before Henry, so talking about his father. Yeah, because we did talk about them briefly, didn't we, when we first talked about Henry, but we didn't go into the in-depth, you know, the start of the Tudors, which is what they were. Henry VIII's parents were the start of the Tudor era, weren't they? And ended the War of the Roses.
Aye, exactly. So there is a lot of debate. Was Henry VII, did he have I mean, this is featured early on in the Tudors.
Yeah.
I think it's the Duke of Surrey, I remember that right, who always claimed that he was the true heir to the throne.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and not Henry. Obviously, he ended up being executed for his plot against Henry.
Yeah.
So that's another guy we need to look at in the next show.
Yeah.
The Duke of Surrey, because he was quite.
Absolutely.
And to what they say, Henry feared him. Even as king, Henry feared him.
He did.
But that's for another show.
I was going to say there are quite a few still around them, and obviously we've still got Mary, Henry VIII's daughter, and we've still got Elizabeth, who ended up being Elizabeth I. So, you know, when we go beyond the Tudors, we've still got the next sort of generations to talk about, which are fascinating in their own right. But yeah, I'll never get bored about talking about the Tudors. It's just fascinating.
And as you say, still got Mary, still got Elizabeth, still got Lady Jane Grey. Mary Queen of Scots is even involved in it as well.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just there's quite a few more people to talk about. But we'll wind it up there because my throat's starting to tell me to shut up.
You've done well. You've done well, Scott.
Thank you, dear. So I'll keep a holiday just after we come home. So where can people find you?
So they'll find me.
And I'm not talking about John, right? I'm just talking about people in general.
John knows where to find me.
Don't want directions to your house for John.
So you'll find me on Facebook, Tarot Tracey, and you'll find me in Scott's List, because I think, sometimes you have to, it's a bit hard to find me on Facebook. You can private message me and I can link you in, or you can find me on Scott's List. But either way, Tarot Tracey, you'll find me on there. And people that know me know that I do tarot card readings, hence the name, obviously, and psychic readings, and I'm doing past life regression, which I'm loving at the moment. So yeah, there's lots of things that I do. So if you're interested, just drop me a little private message on Facebook or try and get hold of me through Scott, either way. But I also love talking about the Tudors, so it's fantastic that we were kind of introduced by Barry, weren't we? Barry John introduced to Scott, and we had no idea at the time that we both loved the Tudors. So it's lovely.
That's right. It was Barry John. I need to get back in touch with him, actually. I think he's just back for the holiday. I think
he's back from
he's always going away on holiday, isn't he?
I know. It's all right for some, isn't it? And then he's been to a parameet as well. So I had a parameet this weekend. So he's just come back from that. So he's always a busy guy. I don't know how he does it really. But it's thanks to him that we met. And then we clicked with the Tudors, didn't we? After that, we didn't realise. But if people want to watch our previous episodes, they start back in January of this year. I think we did our first one about Henry VIII. So if you scroll through Paranormal and History, you'll see our little faces pop up. And you can watch them in order if you want to. If you go on
YouTube, our YouTube channel, they're all listed there. I just talk about Parameet. We're putting together Scottish Parameet with Neil Packard next year. We've not had a chance to do it yet. We're doing it after. We've got to get the wheels in motion after October.
Because
I've also been asked to organise the V1 school Halloween event.
Oh, wow. You're a busy chap yourself then, Scott, aren't you? You're on.
Don't have a clue what I'm doing. It's a primary school. They've asked me to put together a Halloween event. So,
Sounds like fun.
Well, it would be. We'll wait and see. But we're going to wind up there, folks. So, as Laura put a post up yesterday, we've all been slammed with this blooming cold.
I know.
I really said something else here. But we will be getting back to normal. We're back on Thursday. I'm back on with Beth from Paranormal Presence. Sunday,
Lovely.
If I forget anybody, I do apologise. Sunday I'm on with Nick New and Kate Frazzy. They're coming.
Right.
Monday I have Genius of Bannockburn coming in, Maxwell Muir.
Oh.
So we're going to be talking about the Battle of Bannockburn, Robert the Bruce.
Wow, brilliant.
He's on TikTok. I think he's also on Facebook. So we've got this gentleman coming in, and Gary from the Society of William Waltz is coming in as well.
So not very busy then.
Not very busy. And then I've got another 2 shows. I've got Unlocked Paranormal and somebody else I've probably forgotten. In fact, you know what? Bear with me. I'm going to tell you exactly who. All right.
Let me put my specs on for this then.
Why did you put your? I'm reading it off my phone.
People probably can't think I can't see very well, but what I've got to explain is I'm actually on an iPad, and StreamYard and iPads, Apple iPads, are not very compatible. So Scott and myself are really tiny in the middle of the screen. So if you see me going like that, put my glass on, it's because everybody and everything is so tiny. So that's why I can just see a little blur on the screen without my glasses.
Well, we got Thursday. I've got Beth, the Paranormal Presence. Saturday is Unlocked Paranormal. That's Catherine. We investigated with them about a month ago at Loudon Cup. Sunday, Kate and Nick. Monday is Genius of Bannockburn. And we have a brand new guest as well next Tuesday, Sketchy and Spooky, who are also on TikTok, and that winds us up for September. September.
You better get yourself well then, because you've got a busy week coming up.
I know. I'm hoping that Laura is well enough to do one more mystery show, because we're taking October off, you see.
Yeah.
We're hoping that she's back on her feet well enough to do another one of her mystery shows. And that's it. So we shall see you on Thursday. You'll be seeing this lovely young lady again as well, when we cover our next 2 victims of the Tudors.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
All right, I'll keep a hold of you a wee second after we come after. All right, so thanks for watching. Thanks to Tracy. And we'll see you Thursday, folks. All right, cheers. Bye. Bye.
Bye.